Welcome to our second episode of the Awkward People podcast. And I'm really, really excited for this one in particular because we have our very first guest, Mr. Adrian Hernandez.
Is this thing on? Are we rolling? We're here on the internet, folks. On the internet, ready to talk. How's it going? Alex, how's it going? Priscilla, wonderful to be your first guest. Holy shit. Can we curse on here?
You can.
Yeah, you can
Oh,
curse.
hell yeah. I mean, fuck yeah. I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
What's up? How are you, man?
I've been good. A little tired. I've been running around like crazy. Mostly shooting. So I work as a cinematographer, an LA-based cinematographer for various film productions at all different scales. I've shot some bigger work for companies like PBS and LAFC, and I've shot independent films that you've never heard of before. So everything on every
every
scale
level.
you could imagine. Yeah. Lately, it's been a really productive season for me, which I'm very grateful for. I just came from a fall and winter season that was like completely dead. Yeah,
right.
that was kind of like crazy. I stepped into the season. I'd bought a really expensive camera, and I was like, great, I can't wait to shoot.
Was
Gonna hop on into this.
was
It
it
was
the
the
red?
red. Yeah, I bought a red recently, and I was like, dude, fuck yeah, ready to go in and just radio static. And I was like, eating mice off the floor, trying to survive, and just shivering in the
I was
corner.
gonna say, how did you finance it?
Huddling my camera for warmth, that sort of
Was
thing.
that just money you'd
It was
been
money
saving
I'd
for a
saved
while?
up. I worked part-time at a Jewish summer camp last year shooting video work for them.
I didn't know you were Jewish.
No, I'm not. But, for money, I'll be any religion I need to be. And it was a good experience. I had a really lovely time. It was a collection of, Malibu-based Jewish kids. And that was the first camp I was a part of. And then the second camp was Russian Jewish children. So specifically from the General Cali area, although some were flown in from Ukraine as part of a refugee program, and they were given a chance to sort of celebrate an American Jewish summer camp experience. And that was really nice to be a part of.
Where was that
at? This was in the Angeles National Forest. So it was interesting.
nice,
I produced a documentary piece for the organization. They're called the Shalom Institute, always accepting investors in their organization. And the Shalom Institute had a really interesting backstory. They had this amazing historic site in Malibu.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, it was taken during the Woolsey Fire a couple of years ago, which was a really large wildfire that took out a lot of land. And their historic campsite, which had stood for like, at least since like the 50s,
Got burned down.
was taken down.
Oh, no.
There were structures on the campsite that had been built by campers from like the 60s and the 70s that were unfortunately taken in the fire. And I got a chance to tell that story with that community, as well as kind of live with them and amongst them during this kind of summer camp I was also documenting. It was a fun time.
My buddy was actually a firefighter. He was fighting that fire.
No
Jesse.
kidding.
Jesse
Jesse?
Alvarado, yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't
he
know
was
he was
there.
all the way up there.
Yep.
Wow, that
Yeah.
was a really scary fire. I'm so glad that he made it out okay. It was one of the largest fires in that region. And at least for that summer camp, it destroyed like 80 to 90% of their infrastructure at this camp. So they're in the middle of their rebuild. And so they're sort of imagining this like new eco-sustainable. I didn't know this about Jewish culture before I stepped in, but Jewish culture is very environmentally conscious. There's a lot of Jewish text about like being conscious and one with the land and that sort of thing.
I can see
And
that.
it was this kind of call for them to reconsider this historic campsite. So now they're making this like really eco-sustainable campsite that's going to be 100% self-sufficient
Oh,
and
that's
like
awesome.
recycle its own like water through filtration systems, and like it's going to be really interesting. So
Kind of
yeah,
the beauty of something terrible that happens and
Yeah.
then turning
yeah,
it into
and
something
Yeah.
even
more
you know,
amazing.
more amazing, and something that could even last even longer.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
And there was this interesting analog that I got to interview some kind of rabbis associated with the organization. They were like, the story of the Jewish people has been that of, a displacement of kind of not necessarily having a place to call home for many centuries.
Yeah.
And the idea that you are then kind of given a chance to rebuild your home in this beautiful way is just this wonderful, metonym of the Jewish experience. So it was a really touching story to bring to light. Not one of the big flashy things I've done, but I enjoy, hopping on that kind of work as well, telling these
Mhm.
really interesting sort of human stories you wouldn't consider.
How long was that project for?
Yeah, that was a sit that lasted for about 3 months, and then I finished that one up. The final piece was about 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's sort of a thing they've now used for like funding and
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah, it was a really
Was
lovely
this
piece
was
to put
this a
together.
project you got to use your Red camera on?
So this was actually before, and then the
Oh,
money
okay.
I got from that I used to finance my Red. And then I went broke, folks. So life of a filmmaker,
Highs and
highs and
lows.
then
Yep.
like desert lows, like desert valley lows, but a lot of fun still.
So fun fact, Adrian and I met through a mutual friend of ours, Layla.
Mm-hmm.
She had she was on her Instagram and she had made a story asking for actors to be in her music video. And I remember on it, it specifically said, I don't mind anyone who's not an actor, but I would specifically prefer one. It's like, oh, this is my chance. I just graduated, theater arts school. This is my chance. First music video. I hit her up. I'm like, hey, I exist and I want to be on it. And she was like, oh, that's amazing. And got on it. And that's when I met you.
Mm-hmm.
You were shooting the thing. And it was...
Yeah, I was shooting with my buddy Parker, I remember.
Parker, yep, I remember Parker.
We shot a couple days on that. And then after that, I remember you were producing your final project for class. And I got a chance to work on that as well. And then it's just been kind of a symbiotic relationship ever since. I got the chance to bring you aboard another documentary project I was on for about a year and got the chance to make and kind of, have it come to completion in the way I was really satisfied with. And you played a character in the recreation segments of that. So that was really cool.
That was interesting because for that project, you were telling me that there would be no dialogue and it would all be in motion and movement.
Yeah, it was an interesting piece. So that was a documentary project I did about the foster care system. So there was this large foster care facility called the McLaren Hall Children's Center. The center was a center that was run in part by the California Probation Department because there was a juvenile hall population that was also kind of placed there because of overflow reasons in LA County. And, a foster care facility run by the prison system. It went about as well as you'd expect. And there are now people who are litigating in a giant class action lawsuit about some of their experiences there. We got a chance to speak to a couple of the people who had been through that experience, and then I worked to kind of recreate elements of their stories, and you were in one of the episodes of their kind of, past, their very fractured memories of this experience.
Yeah, and I remember you specifically asking me, you're like, hey, so this character...
It's a strange pitch. It's a very strange pitch, yeah.
The way you worded it, I sympathized.
Yeah, it was an intriguing character. So, to kind of hop to it, the character that you were playing was a kid who had essentially grown up in the very, very worst of the foster care system and had essentially at 17 become an arm of its malice. So he was going around abusing the other children in the facility.
Because that's what he grew up doing.
Yeah.
That's all he knew.
We will get to the jokes soon, folks. This is a comedy podcast. But, the thing about it that's interesting is that, you have this kind of strange cycle that occurs in places where this abuse is encumbered. And there are some people that act as remnants of that, unfortunately. And you got the chance to embody that kind of complicated reality. I think you did a fantastic job. So thank you so much for hopping on that.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Aww.
And I've got more projects down the pipeline I want to, get you on and that sort of thing. And I'm just excited to be here and excited to talk, man. Yeah.
And then he was also our
everything.
on a project that Priscilla and I are currently working on.
That sounded like you farted. I'm not gonna lie.
Maybe I did. And I turned the chair to cover
That
it.
was me, folks. That was me.
Yeah, he also directed, filmed, everything, literally.
Sound, gaffer, or
Uh,
clapper, or
on the
scripty.
pilot for your Awkward People web show, which I think
Yeah.
is going to be coming out soon and very fun.
If we can find
If we
an
can find
editor,
an editor.
that's been the toughest thing,
It's
man.
been the
Yeah.
hardest thing to find an editor. I asked so many people, like, I tell them what the deal is. I'm like, we're just starting, blah, blah, blah. They don't answer us.
Mm,
They leave
mm.
us, there's dead silence. I told Alex, at this point, we're going to have to figure out how to edit ourselves.
I could probably teach you in like a weekend.
Oh
Can
my
you?
God, can you?
Dude,
We'll talk after the show, but that
Yes.
might be the
Because we're
route.
like, at the end, I feel like that's going to like save us more money because
Yeah.
we're not spending on that. And also, we can just push out like the content faster.
Yeah,
Because I'm like,
absolutely.
it's so beautifully shot. Like, even the stills, my mom was like, I was showing my mom the stills because she was in Mexico this whole time. And she was like, these look so beautiful.
Yeah,
I'm
they're
all
really
like,
pro.
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you, Priscilla's mom. But I think the same thing too, because I remember telling Alex when we were looking for someone to film, he was the first person that came to mind for him. And I was like, okay, well, let me go see his stuff. And for me, like, I love the aesthetic of like Broad City and like kind of 70s, kind of retro looking. And you embodied all of that when I was looking at your work. And I was like, for sure, we want him on.
Oh, lovely. Thank you
Yep.
so much. I mean, I've shot an eclectic range of films now, everything from like kind of sobering PBS documentaries to like children's puppet shows for YouTube to like horror films. And
love
I think
it.
part of the fun of being a cinematographer is that you get to really embody the new world and script and director's vision that you're catering to. So this coming weekend, for instance, I'm working on a comedy film about a woman who has an awkward experience with a pap smear she has. And that is a completely wacky and zany visual style. And then after that, I'm working on a music video for an emerging artist named Jess, who's releasing an album soon. Shout
Okay.
out Jess. Be on the
Hell
lookout
yeah.
for their new project upcoming. And that's going to be like a really like laid back. We're like going out into nature and shooting this
that's
performance
nice.
piece where they're playing guitar and kind of walking amongst this like beautiful foliage and that sort of thing. There's going to be like a camping scene. It's going to be a really laid back affair.
So on a music video,
Sure.
well, for Layla's, I remember she was kind of playing her songs, but not really.
Yeah,
Right,
so we
for
have
sound.
something called playback.
Playback, right.
Yeah, where we'll go in and allow the performer a chance to kind of like play to a backing track to be able to then get sync audio as well as like a sense of performance that's, close enough to the version that they have either studio recorded or maybe like a live recording they're impersonating or something like that.
Why can't a band fully play?
It's a great question. So it depends a lot on the nature of the band in question. Some cases they want a live performance, and you would cover that with multiple cameras and multiple angles. Ordinarily, because of the acoustics in a performance like set that might look good visually versus like a formal studio setting, which might be the most ideal place to record
Right.
their sound and that sort of thing, they'll prefer having the pre-recorded backing track and then them performing in the place that looks most visually ideal for the video in question.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So there's some people's jobs on like really high-end music videos where they literally just do playback. They just hit the play button and the pause button.
That's all they do?
That is all they do. There's a lot of
Sign me up.
waste on larger film sets, let me tell you, my goodness. But yeah.
Wanted to ask you what piqued your interest in filmmaking. Did it start as a kid? Were you like inspired by anyone like growing up around you that you're like, oh, I want to do what they do, or was the inspiration from outside?
Yeah, I grew up with nobody around me who was a filmmaker. I went to school later on. I went to USC. Fight on, Trojans. I went to
Hey, I
USC.
use Trojan.
Yeah,
Oh.
I do as well in more ways than one. But
Traumatized.
I had the chance to meet a lot of kids there who grew up as showbiz kids. So they
Mhm.
grew up with parents who were in the industry. I never had anything like that, but I knew I loved film from a very, very early age. I would go to the 99-cent store and buy horror movies, old science fiction films, all the ones you can name: The Beast of Yucca Flats, Alligator Man, The Lost Skeleton of Cadavra,
Oh
like
my
all these
god,
really
dude.
bizarre science fiction films. And I would devour them like popcorn. I was
Mm-hmm.
so it kind of brought into their weird, low budget little worlds. And I remember I saw the original Godzilla film on VHS, and they had a documentary at the end of the VHS tape that was about suitmation,
What's
which
up?
was their technique of putting a large, muscular Japanese man in a 100-pound rubber suit.
Like a sumo
And
wrestler or just
no, just kind of like
Just
a
like
big
muscular.
guy, basically, and have him pretend to be this Japanese monster. And
that's
the
awesome.
suitmation philosophy was more than just putting the guy in the suit. It was the photography that went into making those
Mm-hmm.
characters seem large on screen. So it was
Mhm.
things like shooting what's called overcranked footage, so at a higher frame rate so that it plays back in slow motion. A lot of those Japanese monster movies, they'll actually record the action very quickly and then play it back in slow motion to make those creatures seem large on screen. Things like that, things like certain angles that you film at in order to make people in these sort of rubber suits appear
Larger.
large. And this concept of like this monster that you would create through this formal technique, this kind of expressive technique, really intrigued me. I was like, it's interesting that somebody's job, like that's something that you get to do. You get to
Mm-hmm.
like craft these weird little experiences
Mhm.
from, a goofy looking monster suit and actually make it kind of look, menacing and cool. So that was what inspired me as a kid. And I always had that intrigue. I didn't really have a whole lot of money to put together films, but I did have the money to start in theater. So when I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
when I was in high school, my high school didn't have a theater program.
Oh no.
So I decided to start one. I went
What?
in. I was working as a person going after hours and that sort of thing, and eventually got it to become a class later as things went on.
You started the
Uh,
class?
yeah, which was nice, and that
Dude, I
class
had no
still
idea. This is
continues to this
awesome.
day at that high school. So I have the chance, every semester or so to kind of float over and see the new
So
play,
you're
and
technically the employer.
exactly. I run the show, literally. I
We were
step in with a monocle and a top hat and a cigar, and I lord over everything that occurs.
we were talking before this, and I was telling um Adrian that it's interesting that when we were in theater, what caught our eye, it catches everybody's eye in a different way, right? Like for us, it was acting, but for Adrian, it was more like the film aspect of it.
Mhm.
So it's kind of cool how like that community brings all kinds of people of the industry together, and then you can network and then branch out.
Yeah, theater is really interesting historically.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about like marginalized communities, a lot of Hollywood has come into a recent reckoning with representation on screen,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
but theater really historically hasn't had this issue as much in America. I can think back to films from like plays from like the 30s and the 40s that were experimenting with queer characters and
Yeah.
having
Mhm.
minorities, and it's mainly because the overhead of theater production is not nearly as high as that of film production. Movies are incredibly expensive
Yep.
to
Yeah.
make, even at a very low
Right.
budget level. So, getting some people together in a room to sort of speak truth and tell a story on a stage is not terrifically expensive. I mean,
Mm-mm.
they did it before there were even electric lights
Yep.
to tell stories with.
Yep.
So, it's kind of this interesting thing where a lot of communities, I feel like, kind of find their footing, find their voice, whether it's comedy troupes or directors in the world of theater, and then sort of move out into other ventures or, keep enriching that theater community. For me, I really had a beautiful experience directing plays
Mm-hmm.
for the theater club that eventually kind of became that class. But that sense of authorship was something I never really had. So when I thought back to like, those nights where it would be premiere night and everybody was kind of gathering in the hall, I would hand things off to my performers, to my actors, and then that was kind of, they took it in any direction it
Yep.
was. If it was a great show, if it was a terrible show, it was kind of up to them at that point.
Mhm.
And, the blocking was mine, and the performances I was generally able to get out of them were ones I workshopped with them. But I was looking for a greater sense of perspective and authorship. And, as things went on, I slowly discovered the camera and its intrigues.
When you were directing those plays at your school, were you directing having already had experience as an actor, or was it just from what you've seen and what you've learned, you took those techniques and ideas and then implemented them
Yeah,
onto
I'd had no
directing them?
experience acting beforehand. It
Okay.
really was kind of, I'd acted in a couple of the plays my freshman year a
Yeah.
little bit. And then it was things I'd read in acting books, performances I'd seen that really inspired me, and then interviews I read about directing actors from
Mhm.
famous directors, some of their techniques and ideas. And then after that, it was really just sort of trial and error, working with performers. Every performer's style is completely different, I've learned, and
Mhm.
Yeah.
getting a satisfying performance out of two people with the same material is an entirely different beast. Some people are more physical performers. Some
Mhm.
people really need elaborate backstory in order to hop into a character.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then some, I mean, you could basically have them improv the entire thing, and they would just be able to bring so much immediate life to this idea without even a director being involved. It's just
Like,
kind of interesting how it all
alright.
works.
That's awesome, man. That's cool. Has there been a time on a set where your responsibilities kinda changed last minute? Like, "Alright, we
Yeah.
brought you onto this project as a director, but oops,
Like,
something happened."
or more things got like tacked on you.
I mean, every single one basically. It's one of those things where, the way that productions move, it's really unpredictable. So you have scenarios where you'll go in and you'll have scenarios where you'll go in and you'll have these very beautifully laid out plans of mice and men that
Mhm.
quickly go awry because a location falls out,
Yeah.
or an actor, happened to oversleep and is 2 hours late to set. I mean, I have had scenarios where I thought I was going to have a gaffer who's a lighting technician that a cinematographer relies on. And
Mm.
then I find out the morning of, my gaffer, who was fine in this scenario, was walking outside and accidentally slipped on a puddle and fell and had to be taken
Oh,
to a
no
hospital. He was
way.
fine,
He
but it was one of those things where, like, well,
twist
okay,
his ankle or something?
the day had hit his head a little bit, but he
Oh,
was
no.
better, very shortly after. But it was one of those things where you sat there and you were just like, well, okay, we got to roll with the punches. Let's see what I
Yeah.
can do to set up some lights here and
Wow.
get the image up. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you could have all this chaos happening. I mean, I have a million crazy stories
I
about things that
bet.
have occurred,
Yeah.
but the audience is only ever going to really care about what they're seeing on their end. I remember listening to an interview with Jackie Chan, and he was talking about the way that some of his crews would complain about some of the longer hours he might take on getting these routines, these martial arts routines correct.
Mhm.
And his response would be like, "Listen, are you going to go to every single theater right before the show and explain, well, this wasn't working out this day. This was no. I mean, you've never seen this. Part of the reality of being a film performer is kind of just bringing it, even when it's crazy.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's like writing War and Peace in the bumper cars at Coney Island, but when you get it
Right.
right, there's fewer, joys that you can have. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, has there been a time where you're on set and you've had creative differences with another person on the project where it brought you to a point where you're like,
I'm
are
gonna
like yeah,
quit.
like this
Like,
close to quitting, or you did quit?
I've had creative differences on, every project that I'm in. It's interesting because there's an interesting sense of collaboration when you hop on any
mhm.
film production. And everybody's going to kind of have an opinion on what the best foot forward is and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. What I've found is that most of the time, the hierarchy of a film set really helps in that regard. I might have a creative difference with a director, but at the end of the day, if they are the director, if they are the authorial voice of the project, I do have to kind of put up my hands and say, listen, I'm not directing this one. I
Mhm.
might have chosen something completely different than what they're doing, but this is their vision. My responsibility here is to bring what their best foot forward is in
Yeah.
regards to the story to life. I'll tell you one story that was kind of an intriguing story in a similar vein. So I had a scenario where I was shooting a documentary.
Mhm.
It was actually for the documentary about the foster care facility.
Oh, okay.
And I was
Mhm.
in South LA documenting an area that one of the subjects had grown up in. And I was shooting some footage of a street sign. So I was on the corner just shooting the street sign. And some kind of locals come out and they're like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And I was like, "Oh,
Uh,
I'm capturing some footage of this street sign. My body very clearly turned away from the street corner." They're like, "Yeah, we know why you're here." I was like, "Excuse me?"
What?
And they start coming out and they're like, "Listen, we know you're part of the local gang around here. We know you're
Oh
what?
trying to
my
intimidate us
God.
and that sort of thing." And they start like throwing money at me and they're like, "How much do we need to get you out of here? What, this,
What?
that?" And I was kind of overwhelmed. I was like, this is it's not a scenario I expected myself in. Let me introduce myself. My name's Adrian Hernandez. I'm a filmmaker. I make documentary work and tell stories about our world. Here's some of the footage I've shot for this documentary. Let me show you what the story I'm trying to tell is. And very quickly, I was able to diffuse the situation,
Oh, okay.
Oh
Did
just to
my
they?
be able to kind
God.
of get them down to planet Earth. But then after that, it led to a really interesting conversation with these sort of locals I hadn't met before about some of the concerns they have over gang life in their community. And they're like, "We're so sorry. We're just so panicked here because of what we've kind of seen. And
Mhm.
Sure.
it's very uncertain. And when we see people on our streets we don't know, we can get a little, we're so sorry." And we reached a consensus, but it's a very unpredictable thing, making
Mhm.
movies. You never really know exactly what you're going to stumble into, exactly where creative differences, even in the case of something as simple as a documentary. I was
Yeah.
grabbing
Mhm.
a static shot of a street corner and there was a conflict. It's kind of an interesting profession. It changes every time you're there, and each project is a new challenge. You don't really have a blueprint for the one that you're shooting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, see, well, that's why I like, and I think I could say this for maybe the both of us, we like working with you is
Yeah.
that, um, I don't, maybe we have had creative differences. I don't, but we never argued. There was never any tension. It was always like, we trust you. Maybe you trust us.
Yeah.
I trust you.
Good. Now that we
No,
got that
because
on
that was like
On
audio,
record.
on record.
that was one of my main concerns. I wanted to feel like comfortable. I even discussed this with Alex before we even started the project. I said I want it to be a collaborative experience, and if
Yep.
there's input that you could put like that would help us or better us or make the production go smoother, I'm gonna take it. And I'm pretty good at taking like constructive criticism. Like if you've done this long enough to the point where I could trust you to make like choices or
Mhm.
suggestions for us.
Yeah, make executive decisions and stuff
Yeah,
like
I'm
that.
all like, if he says it, I'll take it.
Well, also, each relationship I have with the director I'm working with is completely different. So I've had some directors I've worked with where they and I will be sitting down
Mhm.
and looking over like pictures and paintings and trying to figure out the frames really meticulously, down to like details of like color and motion really meticulously. And then I've had other scenarios where a director will show up with like a poem they've written, and it's
Oh
like that's
god.
kind of like the script we have, and then it's just we sort of find it along the way. And
Oh,
I've
okay.
produced interesting pieces in that scenario as well. There have been some where I don't even really know the script or the shot list until I show up on the day. There are others where we're planning it for like months in advance. So it's really its own animal each time.
When you don't get the shot list beforehand, do you are you emailing them like, "Hey, like, would you be able to send me one? I'd like to know kind of what we're gonna do for the day," or is it just
It depends a lot on their process. So, like, I've shot a lot of documentary work, which for
Yeah.
cinematographers, I think is a really important background to have. If only because in the world of documentary, you don't necessarily prepare for a whole lot because you're capturing
Mm-hmm.
life as
As it
it's
is.
fleeting in front of you.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, because of that, that unpredictability gives you a kind of improvisational ability and an ability to capture beautiful imagery in a very short amount of time. That's incredibly important to being a versatile cinematographer. If only because you have these best laid plans of mice and men, but I mean, if someone happens to be late, if something occurs that slows down production in any way, you might be racing against the clock to make that magic happen,
Mhm.
and you have to be able to kind of roll with the punches. You
Yeah.
know.
I'm like, be honest. What was it like working with us? This is what
Horrible
we're here
experience. No, I'm
for.
kidding. You
This is what
guys
we're here
were
for.
fun and delightful. I think the thing that really stuck out to me the most was that you knew exactly what kind of material. I love that soundboard, by the way. You knew exactly what kind of material you were stepping into. I mean, you had referenced Broad City, that 70s show.
Yeah.
It was very clear to me that the show you guys were putting together had an identity, which is very important stepping in. There have been some scenarios where I've hopped in with directors, and it's a lot of, well, what do you think in regards to like them coming to me for every single visual
Does that
choice?
bother you?
It does in a way. I mean, I can, come up with visual choices until the
Mm-hmm.
cows come home. But at the end of the day, I'm
What'd you call
there to
us?
help that director tell their story. And if they don't know what that story is, what that world is they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to create, it can make my job a little difficult, if only because, there are a lot of ways to skin a cat. I've
Yeah.
seen directors shoot comedy scenes with a lot of coverage,
Mhm.
a lot of detail and close ups and camera movement. And I've seen directors shoot comedy scenes in a single take with a very limited camera movement where they're playing into an almost real time comedy.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I've seen both work. So it really depends on the story.
Why do you think that is though? That they have like no idea what they're gonna do? Because I feel like when I write something, I think in like pictures. So as soon as we were writing the script, I start seeing like images in my head, like, oh, I like this, I like the idea of this, and I can't fathom people not having like an idea of what they're writing. Because do you think that they just don't have, not, I don't want to say capacity, but like they don't have the maybe ability, not any better, to think in that way, or do you think like they don't really know what the heart of the story is yet?
I think it's knowing the heart of the story. Filmmaking is the act of presenting yourself and your perspective really earnestly on screen.
Yeah.
And I can say that there are some times where I can feel like directors don't do the work of sitting down. It's almost like you have to write an essay about what it
Mhm.
is you're trying to say. It sounds
Yeah.
so incredibly simple, but with the movement and gusto of the size of a film production, whether big or small,
Mhm.
one can get so wrapped up in those logistics that they might ignore the simple question of what it is they're trying to achieve by
Mhm.
presenting and accomplishing the piece that they're looking to put together.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that would be my best guess, is that sometimes they kind of just don't take that pause and say, "Well, I'm giving birth to something here. What's my
Yeah.
goal?" You know?
Because I know that's something we gave a lot of thought to. Alex and I were like, okay, but why are we writing this? Why is this important? Every choice our characters would make, even though it's ourselves, we're like, why would they do this? It doesn't make sense. Let's scratch that. Let's rewrite it. So that's why to me, it doesn't make sense. Well, I guess I haven't
No,
worked
I
with
think
enough
it's.
people. I haven't worked with enough people to know the way other people like think, because I instantly think of images. Even when I write like my stand up and stuff, I think in images. And that's why a lot of it's really descriptive,
Yeah.
Well,
as you can see from the
well,
last one.
I think the storyboarding has definitely
Yeah.
helped us. I like. I'm very visual too.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, filmmaking is a visual medium, and it can be very easy to get a couple people in a room and give them kind of podcast coverage in a way in a
Mhm.
narrative film where you're just sort of capturing the dialogue. And in some
Mhm.
cases, that kind of storytelling, principally dialogue based on film, can be incredibly compelling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's a visual medium. There's a lot of possibilities as to what you can do and present. I was listening to a film theorist I liked the other day, and he was talking about how film is the best possible way that we can represent the flow of the human unconscious in terms of the way that we recollect imagery and sound and memory. It has almost a very similar flow to the way a lot of people's brains work. And I think with that much expressive possibility of almost being able to unlock something very close to the human mind,
Mhm.
why would you not go crazy? You know, why would you not have fun with it? It depends a lot on the story as well. I mean, I've worked on films where, again, it's a very contained thing, and it sort of needs to be in order to make that story compelling. It's a lot
Mhm.
about filmmaker John Cassavetes said that the best set ever designed was the human face, and his films are a lot of close-ups and intimate details of like consorted looks and glances and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And then you have someone like John Ford who makes these incredible westerns that are like, you know, the scale of the entire Arizona desert.
Mhm.
It just depends on how big your canvas is. Mm.
Yeah, that's so true. And was was there a time on a set, or maybe you could say, maybe you could talk about a very challenging time for you on set, maybe more recently.
Sure. I mean, what's interesting about every shoot that I'm on again is that they're an entirely different collection of scenarios and
Yeah.
circumstances. So there was a shoot I was on not that long ago where I shot inside of a car, and the entire script took place in a car. It could not have been a more contained and controllable
Mhm.
location. And yet, the ability to be able to rig the camera to allow enough space for me to operate, the performers to perform, a sound person to also
Oh
be,
gosh.
you
In a
know,
car?
in a car. We
Oh
had to
no.
rig the car in order to
Oh.
have sound recording remotely. And then he was like in a follow car. It was this whole logistical nightmare of simply getting two people to talk in the back seat of a car and still have it look. I had to like rig lights to the top of the roof of the car while also flagging it off. And then we had a driver that was also driving the car. And then I was like scrunching my body into the side of the car and then like rolling it. It was a very like crazy setup, but
But it worked.
it worked and it looked great. And it was a challenge. It was a really unique challenge. And stepping in, I hadn't even really considered the full logistics of it. I was like, oh,
Mhm.
we're going to be shooting in a car, but the size of the car we were working in,
What kind of car was it?
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
it was supposed to be an Uber, a fairly small Uber. So
Like a
we went
Fiat?
with we went with just a very small Prius, almost, and it was story wise, it worked great, and the film looked great, but it was a challenge to kind of put that together and to have it come together visually
So
satisfactorily.
was everyone who was working on set in the car?
Not everybody.
Okay.
We had again a follow car where there was
Oh,
a
right.
couple of people sort of monitoring, and then we would kind of like do a couple of rounds, and then it was this kind of big thing.
So was the car were they actually driving the car?
So in that particular scenario, yes, but we had a driver that was not acting who was specifically just eyes
A
on the road
driver.
type thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then I was in the
Yeah.
passenger seat, monitoring camera and like, like off to the side and making sure everything. And then we had our two performers in the back with, some lights very kind of carefully tucked into the kind of sunroof area of the vehicle.
Gosh.
It doesn't sound like much, but by
No,
the end of
it's
it, my neck was like, oh,
Did
good
you
lord.
rig a porta potty?
We didn't rig a porta
How did you guys
potty.
take breaks? Just driving the
We
entire
had a
time?
chance. There was a McDonald's close by, so we managed to slip in there, buy a pack of fries, and then have access to the bathroom, and then just
I
sort
hope
of
you
slip
saw a
out.
masseuse the next day.
I hope
Chiropractor.
one of these days I'll have that luxury. When I work on the really big sets, that's first thing in the morning.
Um, what are some qualities of a script that will help you decide to to work on it, or
Sure.
maybe
or not work
or
on
not
it.
work on it?
Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day, what kind of stories I really gravitate to, what kind of stories I like to tell. I'm really attracted to stories about outcasts and outsiders, people who are sort of looking in. I
Oh,
always
like, makes
considered
sense.
myself
The underdogs.
the underdogs, the awkward people,
Yeah.
if you will.
Hey,
You
that's the
know,
name of the show.
exactly, exactly. If only because these people, to me, have the most interesting stories to tell, and the way that they might feel alienated or removed from common culture is
Mm,
very identifiable for a lot of people. There hasn't been a time, I think, in anyone's life where they haven't felt out of step with their world or
Yeah.
a group in some way.
mhm.
And the stories that really speak to that emotion of alienation the most tend to be the ones that attract me the most. So a lot of horror films, for instance, really attract me. I
Mhm.
was thinking about this the other day. The worst things that generally happen in horror films happen when someone's alone. And it's kind of an interesting conundrum.
Mm.
Whereas drama, it's usually a few people coming
Mm-hmm,
together and that
mm-hmm.
sort of thing.
I didn't think about that.
Yeah, so it's sort of an intriguing thing. So horror films really attract me. Yeah, I'd say that's a big attraction. I'd say a detractor if I feel like the script is in any way,
If it's like
you
too on the
know.
nose.
Yeah, I've worked on some scripts here and there, just
Like
inevitably
whose?
for money.
I just
Gonna
Whose?
name all the names, but I've worked on some scripts where I just sit there and I go, I mean, you might as well change the main character's name to your own and call this, your journal. I mean, it's so one to one, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
to that experience, and not in a way where there's obviously like Seinfeld and all these fantastic shows that are pulled very much from life.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
there's other times where you can kind of feel like you're just sort of, you could pay for a therapist and probably get a lot of this out,
Or do stand up.
little cheap or stand up comedy.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
no.
I hear that there's a show that you guys might be doing very soon.
There's a show tomorrow.
Yeah, there's a show tomorrow.
Wow.
By the time this comes out, it'll be too late.
The show would have already
But-
happened.
But I'm doing it for the second time. Alex is doing it for like the 100th time.
Yay. Very fun.
But
Very
it's super
fun.
nerve-wracking.
I love
And
it.
guess who's gonna film it?
I heard a rumor that I might
Yeah.
be filming some of that footage. So I'm very excited to hear both of your sets for that occasion. I know Priscilla is ecstatic and not
I'm
nervous at all.
I'm not nervous. Earlier we were eating and I'm like, I'm not nervous.
Then she's like, I don't care. I really don't care. I don't care. I'm so nervous. I can't do this.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
I'm fine.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
She's the living George Costanza.
I love it.
I tell him I'm like my worst own enemy. I'm like, I'm fine. I got this. Like, it's no problem. Who cares? Whatever. It's not a big deal. And then as the time gets closer, I'm like, I'm gonna die. Like 5 minutes before my set, I was going.
Well, I mean, you will die whether the set happens
Yeah.
or not. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. Now, I have a question for you guys that I might
Ooh,
kind of
okay.
hop
Oh.
into because I was contemplating this question the other day.
Mhm.
What compels artists to want to create art? I know it's different for everyone, but I feel like there's a commonality that I think about that really motivates every artist I know. I feel like every artist I know is someone who was born. All humans aspire for human connection,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but I feel like artists have a particularly enhanced need for it, like a really deep rooted need for some kind of enhanced connection with other people.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of leads them to seek out the widest audience of connection possible.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with that statement. Just because I even tell Alex I don't waste time meeting people that I feel like really surface level.
Yep.
I said I feel like I really need to connect with people. Like these days, people are so superficial and care about the dumbest things, about having the most expensive things, but nobody cares about having a real conversation. Like the second it gets too real, they're just like push aside, like, why do you have to be like that right now? Why do you have to be like that? I'm like, because I'm tired of talking about dumb things that don't matter. It's annoying, and that's why when, I say, I found him in, the pound, but when I found Alex, I felt like I actually connected with another human being, you know what I mean? Beyond just, oh, we like to do, artsy things together. It was just, I could, aside from the art, I could confide in him. He's my best friend. He's, family to me, and I feel like finding quality people these days are really hard. And the only place where I seem to find people that way is in the arts, because it's people always just trying to get it out there in in an artsy way, whether it's painting or sculptures
Mhm.
and stuff like that. my cousin did this like really cool sculpture that she had a residency, I think, at the Blue Roof Studios, and it was all based on her childhood. So her whole sculpture was made out of things she grew up in her childhood home and things that she was able to afford, which was like 99-cent store items.
Wow, what a beautiful
Yeah.
choice of medium. Very, very personal. Wow.
Yeah, and it was so deep, and when I read her, like, I'll send it to you guys.
I'd
When
love to see it.
I
Yeah, me too.
when she was explaining it, I cried because like I recognized the curtains on there, I recognized the chairs on there, and it
Wow.
was beyond like, look, I made something pretty. It was so deep and so beautiful, and I feel like I rarely see things like that these days. Like things that like move me.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? Something I like feel it in here. And
Yeah.
like I rarely see things that do that to me.
Yeah. I'm in a similar boat where I feel like, I'll do some corporate work on occasion. And something that I hear commonly in these environments is like, listen, we need visibility. We need what's called retention editing, which is keeping people on the platform as long as possible and that sort of thing.
Wow.
Mhm.
The goal is to keep people's eyes on the screen and not a whole lot of concern with what they're seeing while they're there.
Yeah.
And I think
Hmm.
when we're in an attention economy that is so fierce,
Yeah.
especially in our social media
With
landscape as
TikTok
creative
and
people. Exactly. I downloaded TikTok the other day just for work. They have me occasionally doing
Little
TikToks for
reels.
brands now and that sort
Yeah.
of thing,
yeah.
inevitably. And I scrolled through and the pace of it almost made me sick. It was like this very like,
Yeah.
quick, fast. Like I was like very disoriented.
It's
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah, it
The
was
choppy
really,
editing is just like da da
yeah,
da da da.
exactly. I'm used to a very different pace and form of expression. I'm used to
Yeah.
like formal film shooting and production. So to see, and some of them were very funny, but to see the pace of information and flow
Mhm.
that, especially even young people, are gravitating to, I was kind of like, wow. I interrupted before you got the chance to
No,
say,
no, I was
as an
I was listening to
artist,
what
or
you were
what
saying.
inspires, in your opinion, artists to create.
Oh man, I think I'd agree with Chris and what you were saying about how it's just the human condition to search for a belonging,
Mhm.
and that's normal in our culture and humanity is wanting to belong to a you know certain group, a church, it's why we label
Mhm.
everything. We like to what's that word?
Compartmentalize, yeah.
Can't speak English today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to have a sense of belonging and find like-minded people who uh, I would say feel a group of people who have a sort of emptiness maybe and wanting to
Yeah.
fill it.
Yeah, there's this sense that art is community making,
Yeah.
and there's this
Yeah.
sense that you find other broken people
Yep.
and you kind of create a little club
Yeah.
with
You
them
gravitate towards
that
them.
you kind of understand and they understand, and there's this kind of warmness as a result from the ability for some people to kind of finally, in a group,
For sure.
get it, you
But
know?
then I'd argue that, all of us are broken.
Hmm.
But like for me, for example, like I grew up in both sides of my family that are very artistic. Some who have turned them into careers, or some who just do it as a hobby.
Mhm.
And ever since I was little, I was talking to my great grandma on FaceTime the other day, who that side of the family's from Mexico, and she was telling me as a kid, like when I'd go over, she's like, "Oh yeah, you would always do these like little plays for us." And I'm
Wow.
like, "Really?" I honestly I don't remember that. Like I remember like wanting to entertain my friends, in the quad, doing improvised scenes and stuff and making them laugh. But I don't remember starting that young of an age, of wanting to, uh, you know, entertain my family members.
Yeah, I like that it came from a very pure place because, I mean, at that stage, there's no talk of like a career or money. It
No, not
really
at
is
all.
just this very simple, pure, like, I want to make them laugh,
Yep.
that sort of thing, which I think is really beautiful. And ideally, a career in the arts starts there and then moves into the career earnestly after that, with you following the lead of your own voice and what interests you and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Have s- have there been genres of movie making that you've wanted to explore but haven't had the chance yet?
It's an interesting question. I've always wanted to shoot a period drama.
Oh, I
In
love
Ooh.
terms
period
of
pieces.
price, I mean, they're very expensive to
Yep.
make, so I haven't had the chance. In some of my documentary work, I explore stories from the past and have some chance to experiment with.
Hmm.
Shooting, stories that take place in the 80s or in the 50s and are able to kind of gather some of the props and sets of those things.
Or on August 6th, 1945.
That's so we'll talk about that very soon because that's something I've been even drawing some stuff in my notebook about.
It's
So
in the back. I'm
yeah,
always thinking about
yeah,
it.
we'll talk about it, and we won't spoil what he's talking about exactly until
I'm
it's
like, we'll talk later because I'm
ready
out
to
of the
cook.
loop.
Yeah, exactly. But Alex and I have a project we've always been kind of circling that I think,
And Adrian has done some awesome research
yeah.
that he has sent me that has blown my mind.
It's interesting. It's a very interesting story that will see the light of day one day.
One day.
So mark this date because this is our first mention of it publicly.
Oh
But
yeah.
there's
Now
something
now we
cooking.
have to do it.
Let him cook. Let him cook, as they say. But yeah, no, that's a project I'm excited
Period
about.
pieces.
Period pieces I've always been attracted to. I've also been attracted a lot to sort of experimental art house films. I mean, I get the chance to shoot some on occasion, but stories that really stretch the potential of what a film can be and
Mhm.
what the idea of a visual piece of motion picture cinema can achieve are really attractive to me. Music videos have been kind of a fun way for me to get into that mold as of late,
Sure.
just because I would argue it's the last place that those sorts of experimental films are allowed to live.
Yeah.
Because people will watch it for 2-3 minutes, they'll be there for the song, and then they'll be like, "Oh," and then worst case scenario, they're like, "Oh, it was weird, but it's a music video. It's fine." It's kind of allowed to be. It's the last film that is allowed to be strange.
Well, there have been some really great directors that have started in music video, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody from like David Fincher, as an example that comes to mind, to Spike Jonze, starting in music videos. It's a perfect testing ground for filmmakers. I
Mhm.
mean, they're scrappy things that you put together in a couple of days, usually with not a whole lot of money. And if you're good and creative, it can be a fun thing. It can be a fun thing.
Favorite movies.
Oh my goodness. Do we have 20 hours to talk about? I'm kidding.
Top.
Top
Top
three.
three.
Top three.
Okay, my personal top three. I love a film called Walkabout. It's an Australian film about two British children who get lost in the Australian outback and encounter a boy who's on his walkabout, which is his tribe's journey to manhood. He's an Aboriginal. And the film is this exploration of the Australian relationship to the wilderness during a
Mhm.
time in the 80s in which it was changing. It's a beautiful film. I love it. There's a Japanese film called Cure, which is a crime procedural about a killer who doesn't know he's committing crimes.
Whoa.
And it's really twisted and bizarre. It's this exploration of evil in the modern world, and it's really unique. And then the original Godzilla. I've seen the movie about 50 times. I love it. It's the movie that made me want to start making movies.
When did that come out?
1954.
54.
Yeah, yeah. It was a film that was made in the wake of the atomic bomb. And it was one of the first films that was made dealing with the subject matter because there was American occupation after the war.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
a monster movie didn't arouse as much suspicion. So they managed to talk about some of the realities of the bomb using this goofy science fiction context. It was a really clever way of kind of this collective community building trauma exercise. And it was also a goofy monster movie. It was interesting. Yeah.
So the one with Matthew Broderick was not the original one.
Not the original one, although that movie's hilarious. Absolutely hilarious.
For those who have always wanted to explore filmmaking,
Mhm.
what are some qualities you think a director
A love
must have or a
of
filmmaker must have?
love of film, an absolute undying love of film. It's very difficult to make a movie, but if you can do it, give it a try, and just keep doing it. It's really about it, you know.
Yeah. I was gonna say, Alex, what's your favorite movie?
Oh man, just one.
Fine, 3. You get 3.
Deuce Bigelow, European Gigolo.
Rhinestone Cowboy. No, I'm just kidding.
Nice.
I love Dolly Parton so much.
She made the movie definitely. Without her, even Stallone too, as cheesy as
He's
it was,
hilarious in that movie. It's so iconic. I love how you went all in. All in.
That's what I was telling her. I was like, as bad as this movie is,
It's sincere.
it's really sincere, and the commitment they both have.
Yeah.
Well, everyone on
This is Rhinestone Cowboy,
Rhinestone
by
Cowboy.
the way, the Dolly Parton flop that nearly tanked her career. It was
Did
that,
it
and then
really?
it was that, and then Best Whorehouse in Texas, I believe. It was like the 1-2 punch of those movies not doing well that kind of like gave her a bit of a scare, and then kind of brought her back to music for a little while, and then she has an interesting backstory. Yeah.
America's Mom.
America's Mom.
Okay, top 3. Damn.
I thought that was Reba.
I love the Reba sitcom.
Me too.
I grew up on that.
I've never
sitcom.
Me
seen
too.
Reba.
I grew up.
My lips
really
are planted in the past.
Yeah.
Boy, my life is changing fast. Oh my
I'm
god!
out of
My
the loop
mom
on
and
this.
I would watch that show every night. It was incredible.
I love that. And everybody loves Raymond. I used to watch all that. Those were the Power People channels.
For me, it was Malcolm in the Middle.
Oh, Malcolm in the Middle is great.
I grew up on Malcolm in the Middle. It's my favorite sitcom. I love it.
I will say a movie that I can watch over and over again, never get tired of, is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Oh
The
yeah,
Coen Brothers.
very good.
I
Wonderful movie.
love that movie. It's funny. It's a period piece, which I love.
Yep.
Takes place during the Great Depression. If you haven't seen it, watch it.
It's a retelling of the Odyssey,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
using these kind of Depression era tropes.
Uh-huh.
And it has one of the best casts of any
Yeah.
movie of that era. It's just a really wonderful collection of character.
You two are
performers.
dumber than a bag of hammers.
What about you, Pris?
Chris?
Any favorite movies?
Oh my god.
We can
You guys are
judge
saying all these-
harshly.
Oh, you guys are saying all these like incredible movies, and I just watch like a lot of pop culture movies.
That's fine.
That's
You
okay.
mentioned Mean Girls earlier.
I love Mean Girls.
I
It's
love
my
Mean
favorite
Girls.
movie ever. I probably watched it like hundreds of times.
It's fun. It's a great movie.
It's like what I aspire to be comedy wise.
Nice.
Because I think that movie is a masterpiece. I feel like we don't get funny movies like that. And I'm going to say it shamelessly. I love White Chicks.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's one of my top favorite movies.
I love White Chicks.
It's a lot of like 2004 movies.
It is
I'm
a.
so sorry.
Those
I
early
feel like the
2000
humor
comedies.
was so much better then. Just
Yeah.
like you could have a good laugh and not feel bad
It
about
was also
it.
let loose, and no one got offended.
Yeah,
and-
no one got
Yeah.
offended. Everybody gets offended over anything. Like I made a scoliosis joke the other day. I have scoliosis, by the way.
Mhm.
And people were triggered. They were like more triggered than I would be. I was all like, it's always the people that don't have anything going on that they're like, they're like,
yeah.
that are like, you
They're
know
bored.
what? I need something to be mad about. I'm like, don't be mad. Like
and it's always on behalf.
it's always on behalf.
Yeah.
Like I'm fucking twisted, quite literally. Like I think I could make those jokes.
Man, it's interesting because the studio comedy, it feels like, is kind of a dead genre. It's sort of dying out, unfortunately.
Mhm.
A lot of that stuff has moved to television, where comedians are allowed to kind of have those television comedies and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But the idea of like a studio comedy where you go into a theater and you watch a 90-minute Ashton Kutcher rom-com is just sort of dead. It's like one of those genres that bit the bullet. Right?
Yeah.
Final question.
Yeah, sure.
Really quick, what is some advice you can give to someone who wants to be a filmmaker?
Patronize films you love, find the stories that you really connect with, and start making movies. You don't need a whole lot to start nowadays. And then once you get a momentum going, after that, it's just negotiating the budget and your fee.
There you go.
There you go, guys. You heard it
Ladies and
here
gentlemen.
first.
Adrian, thanks again for being on the show.
First
Always-
guest, folks.
First guest.
Always a pleasure to work with you, and I know that we will continue to work with you in the future.
Mhm.
Where can people follow you?
Sure. The best place to keep track of my work and new material I'm putting out is through my socials or my website, Hernandez Media. So I'm at Hernandez Media on Instagram, and then I'm hernandezmedia.org on the internet. And that's where you can find all the material I'm putting out.
And if you want to make a movie, he's your guy.
hire me.
Hire him.
Hire him.
We highly recommend
I
him.
start at $900 an hour to show up, and then the rest is
Hey, for Los
a
Angeles, that's not
scale
bad.
that gets more exponentially pricey.
All right. Well,
All right.
again, thanks again, man. And we'll see you. We'll see you soon. Thanks
right.
everyone
All right.
for
Have a good
Thank
day,
you, everybody,
gamers.
for
watching.
listening. Have a good one.